Hello, and welcome to Conversations with Reverend G. I am Reverend Grenetta Mason, aka Reverend G, and I'm here every Monday night with conversation with guests from all walks of life with different perspectives. And we talk about a little bit of everything. We talk about life, we talk about love, and we talk about spirituality. We talk about spirituality from a practical point of view. How does it support you in your everyday life? And what practices are your go to practices when you need support? There's so much going on, and we have just wake up every day, and there's just something different going on. And so, how do we handle that? What are our go to practices in our spiritual toolkit? I talk about the spiritual toolkit, and the spiritual toolkit is personal because we all have different things that work for us. We talk about how our spiritual practices can get us through a lot of different things. And I'm happy to share, what my practices are and hope that I can support you in finding ways to just get through the chaos. Every day there's just something new and we need support to get through it all. And one of the things that I love to do is support you in finding joy and living your best life with grace and ease. You can find me every day on Facebook with inspirational messages as Reverend Grenetta Mason. I'm on YouTube as Rev Grenetta. Tonight, I have a really special guest, and I'm excited to have Patricia Lucia Crossley here. Patricia is a nonprofit and a philanthropic advisor, and she's worked many years in the nonprofit arena and has a lot to share with us about her experiences. Welcome, Patricia Lucia Crossley.
Welcome. Thank you. Hi, Reverend G. How are
Right.
you?
Good night, Reverend G. I'm great. How are you today?
Just wonderful. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you come on and have a conversation with me. When I always think about, you being in the nonprofit and the philanthropic world, all that money you raise for all the different organizations as like the grants and the funding. And I think that's really a skill. And a lot of people would benefit from having some of the knowledge that you have and some of the things that you can share about fundraising, being in that world and very successful in that world. I know you started a company called the Lucia Group, so talk about how you got to the point of starting your own company.
Well, if I could just say one thing before I answer that,
You can say anything you want to say, right?
is that Grenetta and I, as I call her, and I are, I think, each other's oldest friends in the way that we've known each other the longest. So we have seen each other through many journeys.
Yeah.
Um, and throughout our conversation, my natural instinct is to say Grenetta. So just so you know where that's coming from. So I appreciate you having me on this evening.
Yeah.
Um, so the Lucia Group was born out of the fact that I worked 9+ years for a faith-based nonprofit organization. We were the community outreach arm for what we now call mega churches. It was a very large church with multiple campuses and so forth. Um, and I was there over 9 years, and during that time, we wrote grants, developed programs in almost to serve every sector of society. Matter of fact, we would say, the 5 sectors of society. So we wanted something to serve women and children, um, boys with absentee fathers. We did leadership training for youth. Um, we developed a housing program along with support services for women and children victims of domestic violence. And in order to do this, my faith-based nonprofit off of a church, you well know that churches historically have not, I mean, they depend on tithes and offerings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Unlike a corporation where they're getting sponsorships and this sort of thing. So, in addition to developing programs, I had to raise funding and I had to be creative with how to do that. And over that time, we had much success. I mean, it was a lot of hard work, but we had much success. Uh, Raised $3 million, uh, $2 million,
Mm-hmm.
smaller amounts as well.
Mm-hmm.
Developed many sponsorships and partnerships, things that churches don't typically think about doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I took my leave from there and stepped away, I thought about the fact that, you know, churches in general, faith based nonprofits, do so much good work in the community. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, what if, just think if they had funding,
Mm-hmm.
the impact they could have. So I started the Lucia Group because I wanted to help nonprofits anywhere they were along the continuum, whether
Mm-hmm.
they were a startup or whether they were in the development phase or growth phase. And I wanted to use my skill set to help train them. And that's what prompted me to do this. But the key was I wanted to reach out to athletes and celebrities
Mm-hmm.
because I believe that if they only knew how much, just a slither of all the
Mm-hmm.
money that they and revenue that they earned, if they could give a slither, if they only
Mm-hmm.
knew how the impact that that could have
Mm-hmm.
out in the community. And I think honestly, I was a little ahead of my time because if you noticed over the years, almost every athlete and celebrity starts their own foundation.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And they do that for that very reason. One, they want to protect their money,
Mm-hmm.
but two, they think about giving back to the area where they grew up.
Yeah, they do. Mm-hmm.
And so that's what prompted me to do that. And off
Mm-hmm.
of this group, I had many tentacles.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the genesis of why I started the group.
But I was thinking about when you talked about the mega church, we don't necessarily look behind the scenes, at the business aspect and
Correct.
of running such a big church and such a big organization. So
Yes.
being, because we come from the corporate, we had our whole corporate background, and
Right.
then to move into like the whole nonprofit arena and a mega church in the background and function from that perspective. I felt like you could get more funding, right, as a faith based organization, right? When we talk about, when people want to start their own businesses and start their own nonprofits, right? Some
Right.
of the things to think about is the funding for that.
That's right.
And what do you know, like, if we were to say what would be like nonprofits that are now that the money, where's the money now? We would
Okay.
say for nonprofits, right?
That's a really good question because over the years, like a decade ago, nonprofits really could not get funding from corporations, banks, your
Mm-hmm.
mega corporations. I mean, they nonprofits and especially faith-based nonprofits were like enigmas to them because they spoke two different languages.
Mm-hmm.
So nonprofits would only kind of go to their state, try to get a state grant,
Mm-hmm.
try to get a local grant from the city government, or you know, tithes and offerings. Really, if it was a church, or they would try to partner with someone who was already doing something, and they would do things like bake sales, or chicken dinners, or fairs,
Mm-hmm.
just to raise funds. But over this 10 plus years time period, everything has changed. So
Mm,
now, um, when I was there, getting a federal grant for $3 million was like huge. It was a
mm,
multi-year grant.
mm,
So the federal support was kind of like the first thing that came along because New Jersey was the first state to institute a faith-based department, you
mm.
know,
Okay.
for the
Mhm, mhm,
for the state. And as we move forward, President Obama had an actual faith-based department. President Bush had
mhm,
it, and President.
mhm,
So we were the first,
mhm,
going back to uh, um, Governor Corzine,
mhm,
and that we started it. So that's where you went for your money. But
mhm,
as things have moved forward, now you have your J.P. Morgans, your Chase, you
mhm.
have your all of your TD banks. You have these major mega corporations who realize that if they don't show how they're interacting with the community, it impacts the younger employees, like the
Mhm,
millennials. They're very concerned with what are you doing in the community,
mhm,
and
mhm.
they'll pick a job or not pick a job based on kind of what your position is on
Mhm,
that,
mhm, mhm.
because they believe in giving back. And so the corporations they've always had that big department that no one could ever get into called
Good.
corporate social responsibility,
Right, right. I was thinking about that. Right, exactly.
right?
Right,
They've always had that. And it was like mysterious.
right,
There was
exactly.
no way in. You couldn't talk to anybody there. You didn't know. But that's where all their money was,
Mhm,
that um, they would use to sponsor things
mhm,
or fund things.
mhm.
Um, but as the millennials started joining companies and demanding, what are you doing in addition to your mission statement? Kind of, where do you stand on these kind of things? They had to really kind of take that money out, and
Mhm.
then it goes into their foundation, like the Prudential Foundation.
Mm, mm,
They have the Prudential Foundation basically built the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, NJPAC, in
mhm,
Newark, because they
mhm,
just gave money and gave money and gave money. So they had
mhm.
to kind of become, they had to educate themselves on why this was such a good idea, and it had to change their minds because nonprofits spoke a different language. The corporation, Gren, you're a finance person.
Mhm.
They need reports, they need charts, they need outcomes,
Right, right.
right? Evaluations, what's going on. And churches, especially, it's you know, religion spans all different types of churches and leaders.
Mhm,
But for example, if we're talking the Black church, the preachers will say, you know, God spoke to me. The Spirit moved, and I feel we should be doing this.
mhm.
Okay, so the companies are like, okay, but how do we quantify that? Like, where's the money that we're giving you going? Are you buying pews with it or what?
Right. What's happening, right?
So when I came along, because we had the corporate background,
Mhm,
I approached it from, okay, we really have to have a plan, like, a game plan. You have to have a strategy,
mhm,
and you have
mhm,
to uh, develop the program so that you can show them outcomes and what are they
mhm,
getting for their money, right?
mhm, mhm,
And we can't, a perfect example. Um, oh my goodness, his name is escaping me, but the fellow who President Obama brought into his cabinet to be over the nonprofit and community outreach department, he ran the youth center in Harlem. Jeffrey
Jeffrey Camp,
Canada,
Canada. Right,
right?
right. Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, and he was the first to go and get multiple year money from large banks. And
Mhm,
his strategy was, he told them, don't ask me what we accomplished in 6 months. Don't
mhm,
ask me in a year because these are systemic things we're trying to change.
mhm,
And it's
mhm.
going to take 3 and 4 years. So if you're giving me the money, I want a multi-year deal.
Right, right. Mhm,
So that's some of the things. So the money now, I said all that to say, so things have changed.
Mhm.
They corporations want to be in the forefront to say that they are serving
Mm.
the community in which they have a footprint.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
they almost kind of have to now. So they're all in. You still
So
have
the
to,
money is there. We just have to know how to get it.
that's right. You still have
Right.
to write a compelling, you
Right.
know,
Music.
grant
Right.
proposal and so forth. And then there's also individual donors,
Mhm.
which is the philanthropy part, because all nonprofits, faith-based or not, typically live and die off grant funding. You either have it and you can do things and pay people, or you don't and you're always looking for it. So one of the other things that I was able to kind of institute there was what they call the development department.
Mhm.
And if you're not in that business, you think development, you think real estate. But that's what they call
Mhm.
in on the college and university scene, they use
Mhm.
it, they call it advancement,
Mm. Oh,
right?
okay.
Your
Right.
Office of
Okay.
Advancement, they reach
Mhm.
out to alumni and they're
Mhm.
getting monies from individual donors. Just the
Mhm.
same thing. So the development office is
Mhm.
what goes out and raises money from individuals, high net worth, major gifts,
Mhm.
you know, $1,000, $5,000. If you're lucky, you keep going up from that, but all of it counts. But
Mhm.
so so the money is there as well. So you want to get donors, and that's the philanthropy side because you can show someone, listen, if you want to leave a legacy,
Mm.
you can
Mhm.
you can help us build an endowment. You
Mhm.
can give a donation, and we'll set you up so that you can have a scholarship fund under your name, and
Mhm.
we draw down a certain amount for a certain number of students every year, that kind of thing. So,
You know what's
so
interesting about that? It sounds, for me, it sounds like like from the mega perspective. I'm calling it the mega church, right? What that you have some monies and some donors who are giving you lots of funds, and then you build upon that, right? But then
yes,
when we look at the starting up person that wants to start a nonprofit, right, and they're not the mega, right?
yes,
You
yes,
know, I think about what would be like some of the, and I think it's probably the same thing. What I heard was now that corporations are more willing to get in the game, there is more funding if you have a nonprofit that you want to start. So I
yes,
think out of all of what I'm thinking about is key in how do you get this funding, right, that you need. And yeah, being yeah, as a nonprofit, right? Because I'm going back between profit and nonprofit, right?
right,
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 no,
right. Even if you're a for-profit,
right,
um,
getting the
there
money.
there are for-profits that will also start a nonprofit, like a
That,
nonprofit arm
mhm,
off
mhm,
the right,
for profit,
and
right?
they'll call it a dual bottom line because
Mhm,
some of the things you want to do, um perfect example, let's say you want to be able to provide books for college students,
mhm,
um and you raising money on your for-profit side, but you want to give every student that comes through whatever you're doing there a book for college.
mhm,
You would start you want your nonprofit side so that you can ask for donors, ask for donations.
mhm,
They're
mhm,
not going to
mhm,
give it to your for-profit side, but they'll give
mhm,
it to your nonprofit side, and you can serve the community that way, which is the small version of what the big companies are doing. They have that corporate social responsibility, and under that, they'll have their foundation. And under their
mhm.
foundation, they're giving out the money
Right, right,
because the corporate shareholders still want their money.
right,
So they have
right.
it over here. But so the not, but I've had, and that's part of why I did it because, so many people have a small business idea, or not a small, they just have a business idea.
Right, right, right.
But a lot of people have, they want to do a nonprofit, and the first thing they'll say to me is, "Can you help us write a grant?"
Mhm.
And I say, "Well, I've learned over the time and all the grants I've written, I say, yes, I can help you write a grant, but it doesn't matter how many grants you write. You
Mm.
have to write a grant that's going to get you the money. It's not just
Mm.
because if it doesn't have certain components and you can't show certain things, you're
Mhm.
not they're going to pass you over."
Mhm.
So, um, the small companies, and I've had even one good thing from after leaving the church and being able to help some of the other groups. I've had actors,
Mhm.
actors that have their own company that I've had playwrights. I've had a museum, the Van Gogh Museum,
Mhm.
and so
Mhm.
like different industry
Mhm.
categories.
Mhm.
And I try to say, let me try to understand first what you're trying to do. And sometimes you have to say, I don't think you can get a grant with what you're trying to do.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
I think that we have to look at it a different way. And then one of the things that I help them do is to say, first of all, you have to have diversified funding streams. It cannot just be a grant because
Mm.
the grant is not going to, they've, in the last 10 years, like I said, everything's changed. The other thing is even the federal and the state and the local grants,
Mhm.
they want to say, they now ask you the question, who else do you have funding you?
Mhm. Mhm.
And if we stopped giving you money, would your business still stand? Would it still be able to go? So now you have to show that
Mhm.
you have other monies
Market.
coming in.
Mhm.
So those are the kind of things I help them think through. And we can always write a grant, but we have to write a grant that's going to get you the funding. And
Mhm.
so there's money out there. The other answer to your question is I help them think about who else can you partner with
Mhm.
that's already that already has something in place,
Mhm.
almost like a brand name that's
Mhm.
recognizable. So
Mhm.
even though
Mhm.
you're coming in with your new idea, if you're
Mhm.
partnering with someone that has a little bit of clout,
Mhm.
it makes
Mhm.
yours just a little stronger. So we can help write the grant and get the funding. So there's a lot
Mhm.
of not nuances, but there are a lot of components, and I get excited when I'm talking about it. So
Right, right, right. So, which is that? What you say you're passionate about? This kind of
yes,
work and supporting people. I like the idea of being able to support people and having their dreams. So
yes,
when people come to you and they have this dream and they have this idea of what they want to do, you can talk them through and advise them on next steps for that. So
yes,
I really like that idea. When I think about the church and when I think about you being a part of the church on the business end, what about on the religious part of being in the church? Did everybody have to be a member of the church or be a part of the church? How did those two come together? Or was it just like here's the business side and here's the church side?
that's a very interesting question. I feel like I said that already, right? So you're asking some really interesting questions, Grant. um, that is very interesting. And yes, they you everyone who worked at the church on staff had to be a member when I began there. Um, everyone had to be a member. More recently, even after I left and so forth, they would hire consultants. That they evolved
Mm, mm,
on the
mm,
business, just on the. So let me just step back. So
mhm.
there is the what we call the religious side is we would call the pastoral side.
Okay. Okay.
So and when I began with the church, it had 5,000 members. When I left in like 9 years later, they were at 9,000
Wow.
because the new campus was bought and opened. I mean, and 200 plus acres. I mean, it's a large campus. Um, so there were a lot of members, but the staff was 60,
Okay.
and we used to joke about it. So I said that so you'd know how much space there was. There was a lot of space,
Mm,
and we used to call one side was pastoral row, and the other side was the operations row.
okay.
And my offices was on operations row.
Mhm,
However, everyone on staff had to be a member. Everyone on staff, every once a week, the first thing in the morning, everyone went to chapel because they poured into you.
mm,
Uh, you know, especially if you work in the business side,
mhm,
it's like working a company. Very draining, and you need to still keep. You still need that spiritual support, and you still need to be connected, and you still need the um have the word inside of you so that you could you know one of the things that's very interesting that I'll share is that we had a I renewed a grant that was going to be um, six. The first one was 3 mil. Second was going to be six over 4 years.
mhm,
But they changed. The federal government changed. They did not want to do abstinence education because the world had changed. They
mhm,
didn't want to do telling high schoolers and middle schoolers that they had to be abstinent because their parents didn't feel it worked. So they wanted comprehensive sex education in schools.
mhm.
Our program had been around abstinence education in middle and high school. The new rules came out from the federal government that said you cannot use the same program because it has to include demonstration programs. In other words, the health teacher or the gym teacher in every school
Mhm,
had to be able to say, well, if you're not abstaining, you can use this and you can use that. And
mhm,
I mean, high school, okay, but middle school, was a little rough.
mhm.
Anyway, $6 million had the grant going on, writing. I had to get that approved because we as a church, that
Ab-
wouldn't fly. Right, right. So I went to the COO
mhm,
and the CEO, and I had many talks. And the federal government provided curriculum that we could choose from. They gave us 17 different curriculums. You had to choose which one you want to use.
mhm.
There were there was only one that didn't have that demonstration where you could here's a con news and
Right.
only one. And I went to them and I said, listen, this is the only one. And if we can't do this,
Mhm.
then they said, well, we'd rather walk away. And for me in that position with a staff and everything, I'm like, okay, but it's $6 million, right?
Right, 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 right. And right.
And that was a big thing. They had a
And
meeting.
$6 million, did you really believe that abstinence was the thing? And if it wasn't working and the parents didn't want it, they were willing to continue to go that way, you know?
And this was a federal grant, so it was across the state. It wasn't just
Yeah.
us, right?
That's
So
the church, the
that's right.
influences of the church. If
Yes.
I just saw a show today about it's on Netflix. I bring it in, but it was about the this guy uh, polygamy, I'll just
Okay.
say, and how they were able to justify it through the Bible and through religion. They have all these women and all these men trapped in this community believing at one point they had them believing that that when the Olympics went there that the world was gonna end.
Oh,
And that, you know what I mean? It's
yes.
so it comes to mind when I think that how religion is positive and negative. The influences of religion, right,
Right.
can trap people into these ways of being that don't make sense. And then it's passed on generation after generation. I think about with us, and we'll talk about what your spiritual journey was. I grew up in the church, went to the church my whole life. And then I went until I went away to college, right? So I never got away from the principles, but
Right.
I questioned a lot of it, right?
And I
And
think we all did it when we got to college. That's the
right,
time that you like, "Oh, I wanna explore this and that," and your parents are back home cringing. Right.
right. Right, you do. And then and now I think about um how do we get to the youth? How do we talk to them? Right? And it's a whole different world now around going to church every Sunday because the generations are different, right? I'm always curious about how um, youth are dealing with religion and spirituality. And I think with this just came to mind. You can research so much now. You can ask Google almost anything, right? And you can get a response. I'm sure that's opened up a lot more for kids. So the curiosity, asking the questions, and so I guess too it could be overwhelming, right? When you think about there's so much information out there. What guidance?
We had very, strong youth programs. As a matter of fact, one of the ones that we wrote from the nonprofit arm was the youth leadership program.
Okay.
Um, and we used a curriculum that was developed by Colin Powell during that administration called Points of Light.
Okay.
And it what we found is that you and even when our program around the abstinence was curriculum driven, meaning we were in the schools, in the classrooms, and whatever subject matter teacher that the principal gave us, that's the class we would be in all year. Like you would think maybe it was gym, but it wasn't. It was history class.
Mhm.
So we presented. What we found, if you present them with facts,
Mhm.
like data, facts,
Mhm. Mhm.
that there's a lot of things they don't really know. It's so
Mhm.
confusing. To your point, there's so much out there
Mhm.
that they're just. But if you give them facts and show them facts and facts, they'll want to talk about the facts, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And uh, and then we use that points of light, which was a leadership approach. Um, Here's what leadership looks like. You want to take care of yourself. You want to take care of your body, your mind, how you treat other people,
Mhm.
anti-bullying. I mean,
Mhm.
so now you kind of you're shaping it under a different umbrella.
Mhm.
They responded to that, and we had for 4 years,
Right.
uh, um, 3 years, we had we would track the number of students, and at the end, they took like a pledge that I'm going to do this each year, and then the last one was, would you do this going into college?
Mhm.
And we'd have a ceremony, but it was around leadership. And once they understood, okay, here are the facts about kind of if I'm gonna do this sort of stuff,
Mhm.
here's what I'm doing to myself and others. But to be a good leader, I want that. And
Mhm.
so
So,
I mean, we had a very successful program with the leaders. Now, once they got into college, um, we didn't get to track them after that first year.
what
But
about have you seen a shift? I know that we talk. So there's like the pre-COVID, the COVID, the after COVID, and just thinking about all the different things that are happening. What shift have you seen in the mega church around youth, the leadership? Are they still doing the same program? So, what are some of the challenges I would say that we're seeing now, and maybe not for the mega church?
well, one of the things which was different for me, because I grew up in the church in Brooklyn,
Mhm.
and like our parents, we always went to church. We were in the youth programs on Fridays. You ushered. You were in this choir. You had to. And my friends were like that. So a mega church is a different animal. But what I have learned is that they have to have their arms wrapped. The pastor can't do everything. So there are several pastors. There's a youth pastor, and then um, in addition to that, throughout all of COVID, we had life group classes. So life group, especially for the youth program, it the program went to all the colleges within our radius, and we provided vans to bring them back to church. So during the year before COVID, they were doing that. So once COVID hit, they did it all virtual, but you're in like your cohort. And
Mm.
so they kept them engaged during the COVID. And it's about it. The we had different levels, the smaller children, and then the middle children, and then the college students. But for the college students, um, the life group classes were great because they could talk about real life things because they're with other college students. So you can't not address issues.
Mm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
even and then they would run services where they only talked about how do you handle if your faith is challenged.
Mhm.
What do you think about what do you think about the whole same-sex marriage thing is a whole big thing that most of the time you don't want to talk about, but the youth are dealing with uh,
The
they're going
LGBTQ. Do they talk about that in your church?
and well, not from the pulpit so much, but in these groups, you
Group,
get to
right.
discuss,
Mhm.
right? Because now you can say, well, what are some of the things you're facing from your colleagues, your
Mhm.
other students in your school,
Mhm.
and then those things get raised. But
Mhm.
um, they again, the leadership piece is strong. If you come from, do I want to be a leader or do I want to be a follower? And if I'm a leader and I'm saying I'm interested in the church and I'm learning the Bible, what does the Bible say?
Mhm.
So then the discussion becomes, how do you break down? What does that mean in today?
Mhm. Right.
Right. What does that mean in today? So
Mhm.
I find that I think it's the having it because you couldn't even ask questions before. If you think about when we were going, the pastor just talked.
Right.
Right. It
Exactly.
wasn't like if you had a thought, you could raise your hand. So
Right.
these life groups help them, and this is in their age categories, and it was every week.
Okay, so by providing the life groups, you were able to continuously engage the youth in the church. Oh, okay, that's good because I mean I've talked to people about what that looks like and how the church has to shift. And even thinking about your church, where you say in the life groups, you do bring real issues, right? It's just not like, oh, we don't do this and we don't do that because
Right.
these
Because you
young
lose
kids
them.
are not having that.
Yeah,
Right,
you
exactly.
lose.
They are not having that.
And during the when COVID was not there, you would have volunteers from the colleges volunteering to teach in the
The
youth.
peers, it's
Yeah.
like peer to peer, right?
Yes.
Exactly. That's
Hmm.
always really good when you can get that. Um,
Right.
well,
And the mission trips, you would get some of them that would want to go on the mission trip. So the
what's
word
the
you
mission trip? Look at me. What's the
like
mission trip?
the it's missions is another ministry that churches typically have. Like you'll have domestic missions, meaning um they've taken this youth and adults on trips to go into New York City to stand on a corner and hand out flyers and talk about
The church.
the church and
That
God and
happened to
Jesus.
me the other day. This guy walked up by me on 125th Street and asked me if I wanted to go to church with him. I was like, well, no, thank you. Right.
Part of the evangelism, you have to get out and not just keep
Oh,
it
so okay,
inside.
so it's that's the mission, right? You know what came to my mind though? When you go on a mission, they used to send Christians over to Africa to on a
Yeah, that's the
mission.
second. That was the domestic one. Is when you're right here, you're right outside your door. You go to the Salvation Army and you help. That's domestic. But international, you go abroad, and we have
Right.
missions that go abroad, and
Mhm.
some of them have gone on those trips. and you're spending time with the Lakota Indians.
Mhm.
So the people who, I guess, if you get it and you get that in you and you decide that you're all in,
Mhm.
it does change you, but
Mhm.
you're engaging them and they pick to go, and we try to do it where they don't have to pay. They
Mhm.
raise money, like,
Mhm.
tell their family and friends that they're trying to raise money to go on the mission so they could pay for their tickets and all of that. So, I mean, if you can keep them engaged, because you still have to have the youth to run churches in the future. Because I think if you just stay with the same message, although you can't change what the Bible says, you have to be able to meet them where they are, just so that you can hear what they're asking and be able to answer it in a way that they say, okay, we've had several of them that want to go to get their degree,
Mhm. Mhm.
MDiv,
Mhm.
in, so
Would
all you
you
can do.
what talk about your spiritual journey? I remember we touched on it a bit where we said, "Yo, we were raised in the church. We have our foundation. Where and you're still in the church as a part of this whole mega church. You're still there. What shifts have you made for yourself?"
Well, I'd say it's two different phases, because now, after I stepped away, I still remained very engaged for several years. Um, and then we moved into me setting up this organization, and I would still help them with grants, or different people from there would want their, like they were raising for the hunger, and they
Mhm.
wanted to be able to give out food and they needed a grant. So I would still do that. But then COVID came and everything was online. And so I can't say, like, in the last 2 years that I'm still actively working on the corporate or the operations side with them right now.
Mhm.
But 9 years is a very long time, and my spiritual journey was very impactful. Um, I felt that I had a direct connection, if you would put it that way after I left there. A,
Mhm.
di- a direct connection to listening, like, if you when you talk and you send things out to your folks, and you talk about, like, the universe speaks to you and all of that.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying it that in that way, but you know what I mean. You list what you put out, the universe will bring to you. So I had my direct relationship with God.
Mhm.
So you still, it's very similar, because you're still moving in the same way. You're walking and you're listening and you're hearing and you're trying to act on what you are getting from that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you try to be in alignment, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Mhm.
Alignment, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So because I didn't have I wasn't working there over the last couple of years, I had to, develop different things. They still have had I did the life group, the once a week life group throughout all of this.
Mhm.
They did the Wednesday night. Well, it wasn't life group, sorry, Bible study.
Oh, okay.
Right, Bible study. So that's one tool.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I do all of my own things, which are they're different, um, I guess you say, preachers or pastors or talkers, people who put out things on talkers, podcast. There's certain ones that you like,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
resonate with. So
Mhm.
I still listen to them. And I found that during different times, I needed different things. For
Mhm.
example, early on during the early COVID time, it was a very, like, I don't know, I don't want to say it wasn't dark, but there were times that I needed motivation,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
And for example, someone like Joel Osteen,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Totally different type of preacher, pastor, and his experience is different. I've heard people say, they react different ways. But what he was a motivational speaker. That's
Mm-hmm.
how I saw him.
Mm-hmm.
It was very uplifting.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have, like, in my, if you would say, my self-care team, I'd
Mm-hmm.
have different, faith-based tools. So it
Mm-hmm.
was a stretch where I would listen to Joel in my, I'd sit in my car or whatever, and he would just, when you leave, you feel like, yes, okay, everything is going to be all right. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
change everything.
Mm-hmm.
He was a total, that's his style.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's some apps that I like a lot, it's pray.com or the
Mm-hmm.
Bible app. And if you notice that, or I shouldn't say if you notice, but on that particular app, you have now celebrities who are donating their time to read from the Bible. James Earl Jones, football players. I mean, you'd be surprised at different people, and they change it like every couple of weeks. You'll have different.
So I'm going to ask you about the Bible study part. So you go and you take Bible study every week, right?
It's now virtual. It's
Virtual, right?
right. Mhm.
So you take Bible study every week, and then they teach you. You read different parts of the Bible, right?
No, well, that's
Well,
not what they do in Bible study. They
tell me how
started,
it goes. I'm just cracking up at myself, but
yeah.
tell me how your Bible study goes.
Well, you know how we grew up. Bible study was Bible study, right?
Yeah, right,
But during this, I think, here's another thing. All churches had to adapt during these last 2 years.
right.
They churches who the pastors older, they didn't even know how to do anything on the computer.
Right. That's
But they
true.
the youth in their church helped get them together, and they were able to do things on Zoom and this, and they never knew how to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
they had to change up everything.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about the church I used to work for, that's one approach. I found another, and I felt so guilty about this because
Mm-hmm.
I found another church that I really loved.
Mm.
And a friend said to me, "It's COVID. Maybe now is the time that people are just searching for different things. So why are you
Yeah.
feeling guilty?" Right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I started listening to them. So some days, some Sundays, I would listen to, and because everything is online and it's on YouTube, you can listen to it. If you don't miss that day, you can go back.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And I like this church's approach. And I would, now they would have Bible study where they're taking an issue and they're talking about it and from the Bible. But in the church I worked for, they would have 2 or 3 guests, pastors,
Okay.
and they would, based on what was happening in the world, they would say, okay, this is what we're going to address now. If you're, I don't know, pick anything. How do you stay connected in a time like this? What does the Bible say about that? So they would have 3 speakers, like
Talk
maybe,
about what the Bible says
yes,
about that. Right.
like they
Okay.
might have the pastor's wife would be one. You'd
Mm.
always have the youth pastor,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the other because it's such a large church. He
Mm-hmm.
used to, when I first got there, he did all the services, and we had 8:30, 11:30, 1:30, 8:30, 10:30, 11:30. We had 4 services on Sunday
Mm-hmm.
and 2 on Saturday when I first,
Wow. So that's like huge, and he did all of them.
all of them. And
Right.
as it grew and as it grew and as it grew, he can't. So now there's other pastors and other things. So you get these other folks that are speaking, and some of them are really good. Not only pastors, they'll have outside guests. So it's good. They would pick topics, so you're not
So
just. Go ahead.
when you said that, so you were at this mega church and you found another church that you like. What was the difference? Can you identify the difference between the two? Was it something more you were getting from the second church or different?
The church that I work for is a multicultural, non-denominational church,
Okay.
and it is intentional that all races and cultures are included and a part of. I mean, that's something that's important to them.
Mhm.
And when I first started going, the music was what drew me because I mean, I think that they could perform at Carnegie Hall. That's just how good they are. And every time I heard somebody sing, then I heard somebody else sing, I was like, they're better than the other person. But they had the music and they did had you know, the different instruments. It was just awesome. So over time, like they even made sure we started they would do they had a large Latino population as things. I mean, intentionally they wanted to sing some of the songs in Spanish,
Mhm.
but we had uh I used to have to write this in all my grants because you have to give a history. We have 47 different nationalities.
Wow.
Right.
But it was all about Christianity, though.
Yes, but
Right. Okay.
all different cultures and nationalities were there. The other church, when I
Okay. Let me ask. Okay. So that's when you say non-denominational, right? That just means like you're saying all different cultures, but it's all Christianity.
yes.
Okay. Okay. It's interesting to think about what does it mean to be non-denominational.
Yeah, because like if you are believing in the holy if you they're a Bible teaching church. So everything's going to come out of the Bible. It's not going to um like you won't have it from other like a Quran or anything like that. It's going to come out of the Bible. And if you are Christian, and it doesn't matter where what other nationality you are, everybody is welcome, and they actually try to include background and history when they're talking from the Bible, so that everyone understands it. The other church, for example, they were intentional about saying that they were the Black Baptist Church. Now, that only resonated because when we grew up, way back when, that's
Mhm.
all I knew, the Black
This is
Baptist.
Black Baptist Church. Okay.
The
Mhm.
music is different. The the message is everyone's welcome. They say that
Mhm.
everyone's welcome, but
Mhm.
but they are talking history when they're talking. So it
Mhm.
was different. The music was different, and the way they delivered their message was different. So it kind of gave. So sometimes I would listen to two different ones, and I know it sounds funny, but it's like I would feel more fed from one sometimes, and I would just stay on that stretch
Mhm.
for a while,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know. Um, but what I find interesting is that without all of that, how do you, as you're going through your different phases in your life and just day to day living and year to year, how do you maintain your faith? Because you're not in the church. I wasn't in the church for 2 years.
Right.
We weren't there.
Mhm.
So what do you do to keep yourself strong and bolstered? I just had that slight advantage because I had worked there and it had been poured in every day, and I had a
Mhm.
strong base, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
that was gone, and you
Mhm.
had 2 years that you had to maintain. It's just like anything else. What if people don't go to church?
Right.
But they still, how do they use their faith? How do they hold on to whatever their faith
That's
is?
what I think when we talk about the spiritual practices, right? It's a part of supporting you in that. I think the part of going to the church for me is more, it's about community and being with people, but you still have to bring something away from the church, right?
Right,
One, you go one day a week or whatever, but after that one day a week, what are you practicing? What are you doing? I mean, some of the part of it. So you say, oh, we do the Bible study. So when you do the Bible study, then you take that information and you relate it in your everyday life, right?
Right.
The prayer, the
And the other
gospel
apps
music,
and the
right?
podcasts that
Yeah,
I'm
like you said, the prayer and the podcast and the people that talk. That's what you said. That you listen to, right?
right.
All of those support you in maintaining a your spirituality. So then, we get to then, do you really have to go into the church to do
And
that?
you're reading my mind because I was sitting here waiting because I was going to say, so what started happening is they were saying, you know, the church is not the building.
Right.
The church
Exactly.
is you. The church
Right.
is each
Exactly.
individual. It's not the
Exactly.
building, right? So
Right. Right.
now, what kinds of things do you do keep keep, I guess, to have your faith still impact your life and
Right.
whatever?
To
And I
hold
think
on to your faith,
right.
or to just to maintain in this insane world, right?
Like,
What is it
yes.
that you do, right? And is going to church one day a week enough? I don't think so,
No,
right?
that's why
Because
all those other things became, this is what I need. And it's not like you're running and like your hair's on fire, but
Mhm,
like you at the end of the day, if depending on what's been going on for a few days or whatever, I'll lay down in bed with my headphones
mhm,
and I will listen just
mhm,
at the end of that day while I'm in bed before I fall asleep. And I kid you not, I feel like, okay, and when I wake up in the morning, I feel so much better. Like
mhm,
I needed that.
mhm, mhm.
Um,
Reassurance, I guess it's called, right? Because I think what I think about is, I think I was saying it to Chuck. We're talking about gospel music, and what it does for me is help me center around some feeling of peace, a feeling
yes,
of knowing that everything is going to be all right, right? And just
yes,
in the music, there's just like a connection to it that brings that level of comfort.
and it's
Uh,
inside. It gets
yeah,
inside, and
yeah,
that's a good point
exactly.
because the music, like that's another thing. I have a very good, a very large list on my phone of music. Of
Mm-hmm.
we call it praise and worship. You know,
Mm,
whereas the the other church would call it gospel music,
right.
which
Okay.
which
Okay.
is which is and gospel music I've learned is a little different. But we grew up in the church and it was all the gospel choir, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's praise and worship, and praise and worship is something like BB and CC Winans,
Mm.
Donnie McCurkin.
But they gospel too, because yeah, I think it could cross. I think,
They probably cross over those
but
two.
no, I think it's gospel. When I think of praise and worship, your church was like white and black and green, right? White and black and green, all right. So I think of praise and worship as gospel is in there, but there are other Christian songs that they sing, right? Right? Like
Right.
Christian music.
Well, they have a different feel too, because if you think back to the gospel, like Shirley Caesar, I mean,
Right?
the Hawkins, I mean, the music is,
It's a difference.
it's a,
There's a difference,
you
right?
know what it is?
Now who?
But you know what? I think you hit it because now that I let what you said sink in, because the music that they sing has to be able to be appreciated and felt by all these different nationalities.
Yeah, that's right. That's what
Yes,
I
right.
was
So,
saying.
so
Like,
it's
you
kind
go
of
to the black church, you just go down on some gospel music and we're
right,
all good. But if
right,
you're going
right.
into a non-denominational
Yeah,
mixed up, you gotta really appeal to a lot more people.
right.
That's what I'm saying.
But
I
it still
totally.
does the same thing, but it's a
Well, it's like, you know what
different
it is?
thing.
It's a listening though. If you're always listening to gospel music, you appreciate that. You go into praise and worship and they interject Christian music in there and you start singing those Christian songs, then you like them.
Yes, 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 yes. More contemporary, I would say, or whatever.
Yeah, I know those Christian songs. I've
Oh
heard
my
them, right?
gosh. Yes.
But anyway, oh wow, it's been good talking to you tonight. I'm glad you could join me.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. And how can people reach you to get some of this nonprofit information, grant, and funding?
Well, I would be happy if they reached out. And would it be okay if I gave an email?
You can do whatever. It's the Lucia Group, right? We
Yes.
know that. Remember the Lucia Group. And what's your email address? Wherever
It's
they can reach you.
yes, P like Patricia
Mhm.
dot Lucia, Lucia, V like Victor, P like Peter. It actually stood for vice president when I was there. So P dot Lucia, VP at gmail.com.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing and coming on the show tonight. Really
Yes.
appreciate having you.
And thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, my friend.
All right. I'm glad you
Have
got
a good
through it,
night.
right? I
Okay.
will talk to you later.
You
Okay.
got it.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me tonight on Conversations with Reverend G. And I'm here every Monday night at 8 p.m. Come and hear some of my special guests talk about all the different things that they do and how we can support you in just living your life in joy with grace and ease. And looking at the different spiritual practices that can support you. There are just so many. So you can find me every day on Facebook as Reverend Grenetta Mason. I'm on Instagram as Rev Grenetta. I have inspirational messages to support you every single day. I look forward to being with you again next week right here on WEMS Radio Live. You have a great, great week, and I'll see you next week.